Welcome into Vandy on SI. I'm Joey Dwyer here with Dylan Tovitz. It was a long drive back from Blacksburg yesterday, but I think a drive that a lot of Vanderbilt fans and the team made that we're happy to make it, right? Dylan, big win for Vanderbilt football on Saturday. I've got a lot of my thoughts out, but before I get into more of them, swing it to you, man. How big of a win was that for Vanderbilt football?
Yeah, I mean it was the statement victory I think we were looking for and we've been speaking about since, we first saw the schedule and talked about it Charleston Southern Week about how big this upcoming game was going to be. And I mean, Vanderbilt showed up and proved that, at least began to prove that everything they did in training camp and all the storylines that came out about how this team is different and they're going to build on, last year's success. You started to see it come to fruition on Saturday, and it was certainly a statement victory. I mean, the first half wasn't great. I think there were a lot of, holes in the first half, but then they came out in the second half and played like one of the most perfect halves of football I think like most of us have ever seen. At any level. It was pretty astonishing, actually.
Mm,
Just how, a first half that was filled with penalties and, where Virginia Tech frankly looked like the better team. That script was completely flipped on its head in the second half, and I think we're gonna talk through some of those things. Um, so I won't get too ahead of myself, but it was, in fact, that victory that this team desperately needed, and it kind of took the, expectations, maybe not internally. I think internally they've had the same expectations since the second they walked in the building, but externally, I think, you know, the country and Vanderbilt fans and SEC fans are really starting to take notice and realize like, look, this like isn't the same old Vanderbilt anymore. The words and everything we've heard might actually have some truth behind it. So
for Yeah, I agree. And I think I look at this game a little bit differently than I look at Clark's other signature wins. I think obviously the Alabama game is his best win. I'd say even Auburn last year to clinch the bowl game was a better win than this. But Dylan, I think this one was different than any other bowl game or any other significant win that they've had just because of how dominant it was. I don't think Vanderbilt football has ever, and Blake Fromming said this on Twitter the other day, like, I don't know if they've ever demoralized the team the way they did Virginia Tech on Saturday. I think that's a big deal in itself, and who knows, Virginia Tech could go and be 6-6 again and probably could get fired at the end of the year. I don't think that's an entirely unlikely outcome. Still, early in Clark's tenure, I don't think they had any business winning this game. They would have had to play near a perfect game to win it. And Dylan, they didn't play a perfect game. The
right.
first half, I thought, really went sideways for them. Diego Pavia threw a pick on the first drive. The penalties were a huge story, and Clark kind of joked with us when he walked in the presser. He's like, "You got me cornered here, so we can talk about penalties for 20 minutes, right?" And we were like, "Yeah, of course, that's what we're going to talk about tonight." But Dylan, I thought a lot of things went wrong for this Vanderbilt team, and we talked about this on Saturday and they still won. I think that says a lot about it. I also think how dominant they were in the second half has really been abnormal for this program against a team of Virginia Tech's caliber in Virginia Tech Stadium. That's a type of win that Clark Lee probably hasn't had since he was at Notre Dame and they won at Lane Stadium 45-23. Like that's the type of thing programs like that do. Really, I've never seen Vanderbilt do it in that way.
You're right, because it was a completely, different look of a win of what we've seen. Like this wasn't some crazy upset. This wasn't, to your point, like there were a lot of things that weren't great in this game. We talked about the penalties, we talked about, or we didn't talk about, but the turnovers on offense. They turned the ball over twice, both, silly turnovers with the bad Pavia pick and then the Cedric Alexander fumble. Like this was certainly not a perfect game, and it makes you think like if this is the outcome of, and we talked a little bit about this with Charleston Southern as well, where it was like they did not play a perfect game. There were penalties, there were some shakiness on the offensive line, and we said like they still won 45-3. And like to see this outcome happen in a game where Vanderbilt made some mistakes, and still they just simply like looked like the better team was certainly very telling. And it feels like something that's happened on the other end to Vanderbilt a lot, where it's like, wow, we played like a decent game, like the other team like didn't play their best game at all, and like we still just had no chance because they were better than us. And Vanderbilt was very clearly 100% the best team on the field. And I saw a stat on Twitter where it was like if you had played those game outcomes and like shuffled the order randomly, like Vanderbilt would have won 100% of the time, which is like
Mhm.
not always the case. It's an interesting stat that they put out every week in college football, but like 100% of the time Vanderbilt wins that game. And there were still
Mhm.
mistakes to your point. So it was certainly, a victory. It was decisive. It was demoralizing to your point. And yeah, it was definitely a different feel than the Alabama game or even the Virginia Tech game last year, which felt more like a shootout, like comes down to the last second. There's field goals and there's, you need a bunch of things to go right. This was like, frankly, a blowout by the time it was halfway through the second half. I mean,
Mhm.
Vanderbilt put in their backup quarterback and a lot of their backups at the end of a game against a Power Four team on the road. Like just to say that out loud sounds kind of crazy, but it's the
Mhm.
truth. I mean, Blaise Berlowitz got in maybe halfway through the fourth quarter, or maybe a little bit, less time on the clock. But the point still stands there that this was a completely decisive victory and a statement showing for sure.
For sure. And though I'll put some of the stats here in context. Second half, Vanderbilt outscores Virginia Tech 34 to 0, 321 yards to 21. That's like they're playing an FCS team.
Crazy.
I don't know if I've ever seen Vanderbilt get close to that against a Power 5 team in a half. Here's the real kicker in my mind. In the rush, Vanderbilt had 27 rushing attempts, 7.4 yards a carry, which in itself is crazy, right? That's why the offensive line got the game ball. Jordan Wright walked into the press conference and slapped it down onto the table. Rushing attempts for Virginia Tech in the second half, 10 of them, 0 yards. That might be the most jarring stat of the night. And there's David Hale from ESPN, is around Virginia Tech a lot, posted a stat. Virginia Tech, I think, was one of the five lowest teams in a half ever in terms of yardage for the ACC, which again is crazy. Vanderbilt had 122 pass yards. All of Virginia Tech's 21 yards were passing yards. Dylan, and other things too. Seven penalties for 49 yards against Vanderbilt, and then Virginia Tech 3 for 30. Really didn't matter at all in the second half. Really didn't skew the outcome at all. Average yards per play 8.4 for Vanderbilt, 1.2 for Virginia Tech. Time of possession, Vanderbilt had it for 21 minutes. Virginia Tech had it for 8. Just completely dominant in every sense. And we talked a lot about on Saturday how they didn't play all that well. They could have been better. Clark Lee opened his press conference saying just that. He said it's an ugly game and they've got to improve a lot of things. I think that kind of shifts the spotlight off of how dominant they were in the second half. And again, it's impressive that they were able to win by with still doing some of the things they did in the first half and honestly losing in some of the margins that they need to win down the stretch. But Dylan, that dominance, I think that needs to be put in perspective a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point with the penalties, Joey, I mean, the way Clark Lee operates and the way everybody in that building operates, everything we've seen, everything we've heard, um, means like they're not gonna come out of that victory. They have their post game celebration, but Clark is gonna go right back to work and make sure they actually clean up for next week against South Carolina, which is going to be an even stronger team than Virginia Tech on the road because there were a lot of preventable penalties. Clark talks about a lot the operational penalties, the false starts. I mean, the 12 men on the field on a like field goal block, that
Mhm.
that's going to be he's going to be drilling them all week for that. And it's stuff like that I think it's not good that it happened, but I do think that will keep the team like not non-complacent throughout the point of the week and keep them on their toes, and like they're not going to be celebrating Virginia Tech for very long because there are things they need to clean up, and these are things they will clean up. I know we said that last week, and then it probably honestly got worse at Virginia Tech.
Mhm.
Obviously it was a hard environment with the noise, but like Vanderbilt's not going to be able to play that half every single game. And with the mistakes, there were a lot of mistakes. There were the penalties. There was you know, Pavia was taking a ton of hits. There was Pavia's first pick, and I think there was a play like early in the first quarter or it was like on, I believe, Virginia Tech's first touchdown drive when Jones ran it in, I think. But like
Mhm.
Linus Zunk ended up like in the secondary because like he was like running late on the field. It was something I noticed. Like they looked a little bit unprepared in a few instances. throughout the game. And I know we're kind of being maybe a little critical here because like Vanderbilt just crushed Virginia Tech and we're talking about, penalties, but um, the operational stuff I do think needs to be cleaned up. And I think it will get cleaned up. Like there's not a doubt in my mind there. But again, and we've, sound a little bit like a broken record here, but the fact that they were able to have these mistakes in this completely imperfect game and still end up with the score they did, and you listen to those stats, and that's still how dominant they were, is pretty crazy. And it was a tale of two halves. I mean, the first half was certainly less dominant, and they struggled a lot, with Jones and his legs on the ground, and they didn't look great on offense at all. They couldn't really move the ball. And there were obviously the two turnovers, but the second half, despite all of those errors, was completely dominant.
For sure. And I think that tells you the character of Vanderbilt's coaching staff, first of all, as well as its roster relative to Virginia Tech's. And I just think if Clark Lee has such a hold on that locker room that they go into the half down 10, and the whole time on the way in, they're thinking they're going to win the game. And they've honestly just got to keep doing what they're doing. That was basically the message in the post game
Yeah.
when we asked about halftime. It was just like, we think we're the better team. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. And we're gonna win because of that. That was what Clark Lee told the team. That's what the players told each other, and it worked still. And I think that's a real indicator that they kind of know their identity. They know who they are, and I think Virginia Tech would probably tell you that they do and they know who they are. And I think seeing how that thing spiraled on them kind of tells you that they don't. And I think so many times throughout Clark Lee's tenure, especially early, you would see that happen to Vanderbilt. I saw it happen to them in the swamp a few years ago where they hit on a big play to Will Shepherd early, and man, that thing just got completely out of hand. And a lot of that had to do with talent, and Vanderbilt's obviously much more talented now. I think the most talented team that Clark has had, maybe by a good bit. Still, though, Dylan, I think that's a huge step for them. And we've talked a lot about the paths of the program and things along those lines, but it's just jarring to see like that game a few years ago would have gotten completely out of hand for Vanderbilt, I think, mostly because of mindset and a little bit because of talent. This year, the mindset was so strong that I don't think they ever doubted they were going to win the game, even when they were down. And their talent was good enough to overcome a lot of mistakes, which we've mentioned time and time again. But I think that's the real story here is they're talented enough to where they can get away with that kind of stuff now, and they never used to be able to get away with that.
Yeah, I mean the mindset is huge because, Clark has told us, and you could feel it in the building that the internal belief since like, last season, midway last season, has completely flipped on its head. And there really is, this team believes they can go out there and beat everybody. And like you think about, to your point, in the past, like, when they played Georgia, I believe 2 years ago now at home,
Mhm.
and they got out to the early lead, like I think all the fans, like all of the media and the players themselves, like knew they weren't going to be able to hold that lead and they weren't going to be able to win
Mhm.
that game. And then obviously that's what happened. I think here, like there was no, magic speech at halftime. There was no like impromptu players only meeting like we saw Virginia Tech do the week before. Like there was no panic because this mentality, this belief, like exists, and it spans from like the very bottom of the program all the way to the top. And you see the way that they act on the field, and you can almost see that mentality seep through. And it's right, like you said, like it's like we are going to win this game. We're the better team. Like nobody needs to panic, and it's the complete opposite of like what the Vanderbilt football mentality used to be. It used to be like,
Mhm.
we're expected to lose this game. Like, why are we winning right now?
Yeah, here we go again.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's we're expected to win this game. Like, why are we losing? Like, let's go. And that right there is how you kind of revolutionize and flip a program on its head. And it's what's been happening the last 2 years. And obviously, it was just the start. It was really just one game with Tech this season so far. But I think that mentality, that belief is how you take the program to the next level. And if that can, they stay consistent with that belief throughout the year, and they stay healthy, like the ceiling on this team is a lot higher than I think most people maybe realized in the beginning.
Sure. And so much has been made of this, but I think this is an especially applicable point coming out of Saturday. I asked Clark Lee after he spoke about the resiliency early in the press conference, is Diego Pavia kind of a microcosm of that throughout this game? And he said, absolutely.
Yeah.
You look, Pavia threw the pick on the first drive. a really ugly pick, one of the more ugly throws of his Vanderbilt career. Really hit the guy in the chest on the other end, and obviously you feel when that happens, something has gone terribly wrong, and it certainly did for Vanderbilt early. Cedric Alexander put the ball on the ground, but point being, Pavia comes back, has one of the better games of his Vanderbilt career. He's the highest graded quarterback in the country right now by PFF. Actually, coincidentally enough, Joey Aguilar is second by 1/10 of a point. So I think there must have been something in that office that maybe was going around when that happened. But point being, Diego Pavia really showed off the resiliency he had, and I think everybody kind of fed off that. And Dylan, I talked to Javi Pavia, who's obviously been a fixture of the headlines this week, but he said that he thought Pavia played well enough to win, and that he was on to South Carolina because he had a lot better within him. But still, I thought it was one of Pavia's better outings as a Vanderbilt quarterback.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up because it certainly was. I mean, the first pick was not great. I mean, he shouldn't. It was more of a mental mistake than a physical mistake. There was a holding penalty. He was about to get sacked. Like that ball's got to go away and like out of bounds, and you throw it away. Or frankly, you take the sack, especially because it was a holding penalty, which obviously didn't know at the time. But that was a mental lapse. Like I'm sure nobody needed to tell him that. He knew it, and he came back, and he was honestly pretty close to perfect the rest of the game. I thought he made the
Mhm.
right reads. I thought there were a couple balls early that he pulled for an option that he should have given to the running back, but I thought, really a strong game. He made a few like pretty incredible deep balls. Like his deep ball looked great after the first one. There was the one to Trey Richardson that was, obviously the amazing catch, but it was also a fantastic throw, and there were a few of those throughout the game. And he, led that offense, despite the penalties and despite the environment, like he was at the line of scrimmage. Like I saw a few times you saw him change the play at the line of scrimmage, which he hadn't always done in the past, and I think that's another sign of his development. But he completely led that team. I mean, there were so many plays I can recall in my head. I think of the you know Eli Stowers flip play on third down, which is not an easy play for a quarterback at all in that traffic. And he runs it so perfectly, and it doesn't get talked about enough. But I thought he had a few good throws to Junior Sherrill. There was the one um, that Sherrill couldn't get his foot down, which I thought maybe he could have. I thought the ball was in a perfect spot. There were a lot of really good throws, and again, you bring up a good point that Pavio really helps. Having Pavio at the helm helps with that, you know, belief because he is a guy who will never let a single like doubter in his head, and he will never doubt himself or his team. He thinks Vanderbilt's the best team in the country. He's the best quarterback in the country. Eli Stowers is the best tight end in the country. He probably thinks he's the best receiving room in the country and the best offensive line in the country, also, if you ask him. Um, but that belief, and even if some of it is, some ill-fated, that belief does seep through and helps with the rest of the team. But to your point with the game, I think Pavia, he really bounced back from that first half. It's not an easy environment to play quarterback in, and he looks like the probably the best player on the field for most of the game, and I think that speaks as much to how far he's come as a quarterback as his leadership does and his ability to continue to command that offense even when they're down two scores or early, even when he makes a mistake. And um, the offensive line wasn't holding up great at that point with the penalties, although, as we talked about, they were fantastic in the second half and honestly were pretty good in the first half as well, outside of a few holding penalties. But yeah, for sure. I think Pavi had a great game.
Yeah, and I think Trey Richardson was really the beneficiary of that. 54 receiving yards, a touchdown, 32 rushing yards. Man, a really nice game for him, and I think one that was kind of a coming out party. And I'll mention this before I swing it to you as well. We haven't given Nick Rinaldi enough credit for what he did on Saturday. I thought he really stood out, led the team in tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, a sack, four solo tackles. Man, what a game for Nick Rinaldi and what a game for Trey Richardson. Two guys who have always kind of been underdogs, have a huge imprint on that game, Dylan. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what this program has been built on, and that's how you go win a game like that, is you develop guys like that.
Yeah, I mean Richardson was great. I think they're starting to realize that we always kind of knew he was going to get a lot of the jet sweeps and he was going to be an option there, the quick, screen pass game. But I think we're starting to see that he's actually one of, if not their best downfield options as well, as a receiver, which like I don't think many of us expected going in, but that catch he made was incredible, and he was actually creating separation down the field like pretty well and
Mhm.
throughout the game. And that's not even necessarily like speedsters, like running flies all the way to the end zone, but his ability to kind of find the holes in the middle of the field. You're looking like 10, 15-yard passes um, like that is huge and really makes him a full receiver. I honestly thought I'm gonna throw an NFL comp here. Like in my mind, he was a Wan'Dale Robinson type. I'm a Giants fan,
Mhm.
so, although it was not a fun game yesterday. But Wan'Dale Robinson is great. Like in like 5 yards, like okay, 3rd and 4, like we'll give you a little pitch play, or we'll turn you right around. But he cannot catch the ball downfield at all. Like once you run him more than 8 yards, it's like a completely lost cause with Robinson.
Mhm.
Um, and Richardson is not that at all. And I think he's been under talked about in the offseason and frankly his whole career and life. So it's kind of cool that we're getting to tell his story a little bit and he's, proving people wrong with that. And he looked like the best receiver on the field as well on Saturday. And then you mentioned Nick Rinaldi. I thought he was fantastic. I mean, he was my actually X factor if we remember back to the
Mhm.
last podcast. So
Oh, we're bringing up old takes
yeah,
now.
glad I hit the nail on the head with that one. But yeah, I mean, he was actually very impressive because we thought like he was going to come in on 3rd downs and rush the passer, and he did do that, and he was great. He had whatever a sack or a sack and a half, and he 1 sack, and but he also played really well in the early downs. I thought he was
Mhm.
like he's not always been a great run defender, which is why they usually don't have him in there on early downs, and it's usually Patterson and Longwell. I thought he was one of the best run defenders on the field as well. He made a few really good plays, a few really good tackles. You mentioned the TFLs, um, but yeah, he had an all around really good game, and I think if he continues to play like this, like not that Longwell or Patterson didn't play great, or some of the guys they were using on the edge in early downs, but I think Nick Rinaldi was one of the best defenders on the field, and they're going to have to find ways to get him on the field more often. I don't know if we have the snap counts yet,
Mhm.
but I don't think he played like every down or near every down, and he still had that kind of impact. So certainly a great game for Rinaldi as well.
Sure. If I remember right, and I thought this was interesting when I was going back through PFF. I think Rinaldi played 29, Patterson played 30, Longwell played 37, Cowan played 26. So obviously more spread around than I think it has been in the past.
Yeah.
And I don't think Patterson or Longwell are losing their jobs anytime soon, but I think it does indicate to you that they really do trust Rinaldi and Cowan to be close to every down players nowadays. I think that's a big deal for them, especially as they get an SEC play where it wears on a little bit. Cowan even was out there pretty early and was making an impact on the game early. Dylan, one more thing on these two guys before we move on to talking a little South Carolina. I think Trey Richardson is emblematic of how they've changed as a receiver room. I think they really struggled to get the ball moving downfield last year, and I think a lot of that was due to them not getting really any separation. You basically traded Quincy Skinner and Loic Fungi. I think Skinner was able to get some separation, but Fungi really not a whole lot. I think you trade those two guys for a few smaller, faster options, and I still think we haven't seen quite what we might see from Martel Hyde at receiver throughout the year. Dylan, I think that's a big deal. They got Caleb Barnett, who I don't know how much he'll play. He only played about 5 snaps, but you look at him, you look at Trey Richardson, who I think is their bona fide number 2 at this point. Trent Hudson still hasn't made an impact on a game yet. Tristan Brown, I think, really has more in the tank as well. They got a lot of speed, and I think they've got a much more capable receiver room, especially in terms of making explosive plays. And again, that builds in some margin for error for them as well.
Yeah, and that's without mentioning we still haven't fully seen, Eli Stowers in all his glory
Hmm.
yet so far this season. I thought he flashed a little bit first 2 weeks, but you throw Stowers, who's, one of, if not the best tight end in college football out there, and he made a few big plays when they needed him, against Virginia Tech, but he certainly, was not the game-changing tight end, or we haven't seen that version of him yet. But yeah, I mean, the receiving room has looked completely different than it has in years past. The speed, I think, is the biggest difference that we've seen. Um, Richardson's been great. I think Heights been a little bit rough around the edges, which is to be expected,
Hmm.
but is creating separation very well. And then obviously Junior Sherrill's been strong. I think Richie Hoskins is a guy who hasn't necessarily had an impact yet. He's a great blocker, and we've seen that, but I
Hmm.
think he's a guy who's gonna, he's their starting slot receiver right now, and he's going to get more targets his way. Him and Pavi have a really good connection, and he can be kind of a go-to guy. Third down, red zone. So I think that he'll have an impact, and I think to your point, the receiving room in general is much improved, and it helps certainly to have the offense. I think we talked about how a lot of times last year, and even we thought maybe this game was going to be a lot of Pavia options and short passes, and actually they dropped back and threw like a decent amount, which we didn't really see last year. And I think Pavia really thrived in that actually drop back, like, shotgun pass plays, which is kind of the next step to developing him as a quarterback is, and frankly,
Hmm.
developing Vanderbilt as an offense. But they didn't just win like with the triple option and the Stour
Hmm.
shuffle play and like some screen passes. Like they were throwing the ball downfield and running, even just like crosses across the middle and slants and out routes. Like it looked like a fully, operational offense. And I think, having pass catchers who can run those routes and create separation, and obviously an offensive line that can, give Pavia the time of day to make those reads and make that throw makes all the difference. But yeah, a couple other things I wanted to mention before we move on to maybe some South Carolina preview.
Hmm.
I thought, Pavia in the run game as a lead blocker is something for sure. I mean,
Hmm.
it's Diego Pavia in a nutshell, but it's probably not great. He did it, I think, twice where once he got completely lit up and obviously bounced right back and was fine, but and there was another time where he was getting out there as a blocker, and I know he loves it, and I'm sure his team loves it. Um, but yeah, maybe we
Yeah.
don't want our star quarterback, out there trying to block linebackers on a regular basis. And Clark has talked about this. I asked him about it after the Charleston Southern game. Like, how do you think he's? We've still. I mean, I don't know about you. Like, I can't remember ever seeing him slide once, in his career, but not once. But
And not well, at least.
no, yeah. But Pavia, has, Clark has talked about it. He's like, we try to protect him, but at a point, like, that's just who he is, and we're not going to tell him to, like, stop being himself out there on the field and playing with that kind of grit. So, yeah. And the last thing I wanted to mention, just a quick shout out, Jalen Lackey on that punt where I don't think I saw anyone talk about this play, but on the punt where he was the gunner and he ducked out of the way of the ball
Hmm.
that would have hit him and it would have been a fumble and it would have been tech
Right.
ball. This was like before the game was out of reach, and it's like one of the hardest plays in football that doesn't get talked about is when the punt's a little short and Height can't grab it and he has to like tell his gunners to, get out of the way. And then you're running there trying to block a guy, and all of a sudden you have to like look up and get out of the way of the ball. And like that ball like was aimed right at him, and he like did some crazy evasive duck move to miss the ball, and obviously Tech hopped on it, and it would have been a fumble.
Hmm.
So that was just another. There were some a lot of like sloppy plays and like not the cleanest game, but that was something that stood out to me is like that was a really like pro play. And maybe some of it was by accident and he just got kind of
Hmm.
lucky. I think that's very possible, but that is like those are the kind of plays where it's like that's coaching right there, and that's like a
Hmm.
well-coached team and a team that, you know, those are the plays around the edges that you need to make and you need to go your way if you want to beat these really good teams. And I thought they did that in some ways and maybe didn't in others on Saturday.
For sure. Feeling again, like the well coached thing. I look at the locker room and I know it's a cliche almost at this point, but it's the old Don Meyer Lipscomb, leave it better than you found it, pick up trash, things along those lines. I think that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And that kind of is emblematic of why they are where they are. But we talked a lot about margin. We've talked a lot about things that Vanderbilt has done well that other teams haven't done well. We talked about all that over the years. I think to put a bow on Virginia Tech before we hit South Carolina really quickly, we'll talk about that more throughout the week than we will today. But to put a bow on VT, I think Vanderbilt won this game the big bad SEC way. If you'll be with me there, like they
Yeah.
pushed around Virginia Tech up front, they hit the explosive plays. The margins weren't all that small. I think that's a big deal for Vanderbilt football to be able to win a game against a team like that in a place like that. to do it that way, I think is a huge deal. Dylan, we'll go to South Carolina really quickly. We've only got a couple minutes before we got to run, but take me through your initial thoughts. First of all, I think if they win this game, that is going to be a huge deal for perception. That means they go into Alabama likely 5-0. Man, that could be a heck of a podcast next Monday that we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's good because they had to, when we were, analyzing how Vanderbilt season's going to go, like they had to come back for Georgia State week 4 at least 2-1. And
Mhm.
they've done that. So they've won their two games. And I don't want to necessarily say they're playing with house money because you're never playing with house money. And this is certainly not how Vanderbilt's viewing this. But you are content with coming back to, Georgia State and Utah State 2-1 and then hopefully being 4-1. But they want to win this game, and this is a game that they absolutely can win. I think they opened as 7.5 point underdogs, which we certainly see them beaten more of that before. But this is a really well coached team. I think Shane Beamer is a great coach. And South Carolina, looked pretty good against Virginia Tech, but you think back to the end of last year, and this is one of the most dynamic teams, one of the most dynamic offenses in the country. I mean, they have a Heisman Trophy candidate in Lenora Sellers, who Vanderbilt really struggled with last season, especially in the run game. I think that's going to be the key, is containing Sellers' legs because they did struggle with it a bit with drones, and especially in the first half. I thought there were a couple plays where, you know, they were obvious, like he was obviously keeping the ball on an option, and they just did
Mhm.
not contain at all. And I think Sellers will make you pay even more for that than Drones will. But this is also a really good defense and a really tough atmosphere. So it's certainly going to be a big test, and they're going to have to play a pretty perfect game of football. But at the same time, this is not this is a Vanderbilt team that, like you just said, they just beat Virginia Tech like a good old like SEC fashion beatdown. Like
Mhm.
this is a team that can stick with anybody in the country, and I think even against Alabama at points last year, it was like, okay, everything is going absolutely perfect. Like maybe they don't need everything to go. I know I just said
Mhm.
they need most things to go right, but maybe they don't need everything to go perfect anymore. However, they still need to play a really, really good, strong game of football to have a chance. And I think if they can come back 3-0, then you're going to be getting national headlines. Vanderbilt will most likely be ranked. You're going to be
Mhm.
talking about potentially college game day and the on the LSU games, storylines like that. Like that might this week is going to tell a lot about the rest of Vanderbilt's season. Um, but they're in a pretty good spot regardless, I would say. But curious to hear your analysis, Joey.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely the best team they've played. We talked about Virginia Tech. I don't think Virginia Tech is a pushover by any means, but I mean, this is a legitimate college football playoff contender that they're facing, and they believe that they're a college football playoff contender. Obviously, South Carolina does as well. They're ranked 11th in the country. They've got one of the better quarterbacks in the league, a guy who I think is going to be a high pick in the NFL draft
Absolutely.
whenever he decides to go. I think they're the best team they've seen physically, athletically. It's going to be a good environment too. Vanderbilt's going to have to bring it, and I think that performance against Virginia Tech would have at least got them close to a loss. I don't know that it would have sealed a loss, but South Carolina ain't going away like Virginia Tech did. I think they're going to be in the game the whole way. It should be close, and I think they're a better coach team than Virginia Tech, and frankly are more talented as well. So, Dylan, they're going to have to buckle up and do it this week. But like you said, if they can, man, that would be a spectacle. The spectacle has already kind of begun because of what happened against Virginia Tech, but I look at it and say, man, they would be all over the national spotlight if they find a way to win this game on
And
the back of the Virginia Tech game. Go ahead.
yeah, now they want it in that building. There's no complacency from the Virginia Tech game. They want to go out here and they made a statement against Virginia Tech. They want to make a double statement against Carolina for sure. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, and that wouldn't be the type of statement like we're here. That
Yeah.
would be like we are we are aspiring for all these things and we are on track to do that. That would be what that win would say about that Vanderbilt team. If they go and if they win that game by 5 to 10 points, like I don't know that you can count them out of doing really anything this year because that's the type of game in the preseason where we said, they probably won't get that one, but they'll get the other ones. And if they go beat South Carolina, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibility at this point, like you said, they've overcome more than 6.5 point lines throughout the course of Clark Lee's tenure. I mean, we could legitimately be talking about them as a college football playoff contender. They'd be 5-0 going into Alabama. You're thinking like you said, game day maybe at LSU, everything would be in front of this team still. And obviously, it's early, and I still think everything's in front of them right now. But if you go and beat them in that place, man, I don't know how you could count this Vanderbilt team out of doing anything after that, Dylan.
Yeah, and you have to feel more confident in it because of the way they played in that second half against Virginia Tech. I don't want to. South Carolina's a great team, but if they can play that perfect brand of football, it's going to be pretty hard to lose against South Carolina. And
Mhm.
they're not going to, obviously you can't expect them to play like that, but the fact that we saw them do that and we saw that complete dominance on both sides of the ball, especially in offense that could just, completely move the ball with ease. And by the way, they did that in the first half too, like really move the ball well down the field. They just had the two turnovers against Tech. Like to see them be able to do that and just put that out there gives like a different kind of mindset in terms of like if they play their best game, like there's absolutely no reason why they can't beat South Carolina. So.
Sure. Dylan, I'll put a bow on it here for us. Big one this weekend in Columbia, but man, I think Vanderbilt fans are still hung up on what happened on Saturday, and they should enjoy it for a while. But Clark Lee will meet us tomorrow and tell us what he thinks of South Carolina and kind of the fallout of this Virginia Tech game. But Dylan, thanks for joining me, man. We'll do it again next week.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Thank you guys for watching. God bless. We'll talk to you soon. Graham and I will probably do something Friday, and then we'll be in South Carolina on Saturday. So buckle up. Vandy on SI is hitting the road again, and then finally gets to be home next week. So thank you guys for watching. God bless. We'll talk soon.